Hey everyone, welcome back to Tactical Magic. This is Molly Maneva, your host, and I'm excited for this episode today. I think that's something that we don't talk about often enough when it comes to self-care and self-honoring is that there are lots of ways that we can harm ourselves and can sort of remove ourselves from being fully embodied, which can be just another challenge when it comes to showing up in your life, showing up in your relationship, showing up for your business. And I've brought a really powerful, brilliant leader on the line with me today to discuss eating disorders. So, trigger warning, we might be talking about things that are uncomfortable. If this is the episode for you, please stick around and be a part of this conversation with us. And hang tight, we'll be back in just a sec. It's not just about mastering technology. It's not just about brand or messaging. It's not just about making more money. It's about showing up in a big way so your people can find you. This is about bringing your most wild and authentic self into the hustle and grind. Welcome to Tactical Magic, a business strategies podcast for the warrior goddess entrepreneur. Drawing on her own lived experience and full recovery from an eating disorder, Maneva Gill volunteered for 2 years as a peer mentor and peer support group leader to help others in their recovery before taking the leap to get certified as an eating disorder coach at the Carolyn Costin Institute. As an adjunct provider in eating disorder treatment, she offers food behavior coaching, meal support, and more through her private practice. Maneva combines practical skills, keen empathy, and an uplifting sense of humor to create lasting and positive change in her clients' lives. Welcome to the show, Maneva.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm so happy to have you here. So usually I start by asking how people found their way to doing the work that we're doing now. So would you be willing to share a little bit about your story?
So at this point in my life, from my bio, I'm fully recovered and I'm doing great. But at a certain point in my life, I struggled with the eating disorder for many years and I didn't really get help for it until I had been struggling for a very long time. And I reached what people might call like a rock bottom breaking point. And it was like change or risk my own life. And I chose change and I was able to get support and I just leaned fully into my support systems and I really committed to healing. And now I've been fully recovered for years. And at a certain point, I decided I wanted to go back into volunteer. And so my lived experience is something I pull from when I'm working with people, but I also have an understanding of this topic that goes much deeper than my own lived experience from my training as a mentor and as a coach that I bring to help people.
Awesome. I just want to say like how beautiful it is to go through something so challenging and to like have such a shift in your own life, in your own awareness, in your own sort of lived experience that it inspires you to help others who are in a similar place. And I think that a lot of coaches, a lot of healers, a lot of practitioners out there are often like on a mission to support a past version of themselves, which I very much can see in your own story. And this is a touchy subject. I think that it's far more common than anyone really acknowledges that the statistics on the amount of people and women, especially who have eating disorders, who struggle with disordered eating, are far more vast than we really consider on a normal day-to-day basis, and that it is sort of a different mindset to be speaking to or to be connecting with. And I wonder, just to start out with, is there, for anyone out there who's listening right now who may be struggling with disordered eating, is there any just off the bat inspiration or insight or wisdom that you just want to lay on people before we go deeper into maybe the nitty-gritty of this conversation?
I would say, speaking to anyone listening and even to my past self, you don't have to wait until you've reached the breaking point to get some sort of support or some help for yourself. Like, you don't have to have a clinical diagnosis to go have support or to go have whatever level of care that you need. And even though treatment is inaccessible to a lot of people for a lot of reasons, a lot of barriers, there are some incredible nonprofits that are out there that are working to break down those barriers and can really help, even if insurance or finances or social issues are in the way at the moment. They don't have to always be.
It's okay to get support. It's actually such a huge power move to get support. I think sometimes we misidentify getting support as I'm weak, I need help. This society is very much founded on the island of one mentality, like hustle culture, grind until you make it. But there's so much power in leaning into the support that's available to you, and so much power in acknowledging that, you know what? I want this to change, and I'm the only one who can choose to change it. And I'm willing to make that choice now. So that's really, really important, really powerful, and good words of encouragement to anybody out there who's maybe on the fence of like, it's not that bad yet. Don't wait. Don't wait for that change or die moment.
I would like to add to that too. From my experience and from people that I've talked with and from my training, both as a mentor and as a coach, the sooner that we can receive help and support for an eating disorder, the easier it is to work with. Not that it's ever easy, but if you've had a habit for 10 years, months, right? It's a little like there's something to do with neuroplasticity and habit and things like that, where it's a different level of challenge if you're able to get help sooner or if you're able to get help later. I've seen and known people that have made it through full recovery, rather they've been struggling for a few months or a few decades. So at any place that someone's in, it is possible to access full recovery. And at the same time, if you have resources, if you have an opportunity at any point in your struggle, whether or not there's a diagnosis, the sooner you start, the sooner you can start, the more malleable sometimes your disorder may be to work with. So it
Mm,
doesn't have to be life or death is not the qualification for getting help, right? And in addition to that, the sooner the better. Absolutely, the sooner the better.
absolutely. Do you think sort of common factors that lead someone down the road of having disordered eating? Are there certain like tendencies or moments? I know, of course, the experiences can be vastly different across the board, but what are some things that you see sort of cropping up or some things to notice that might indicate what my relationship to food or eating is not exactly healthy?
Do you mean risk factors that may lead someone into this place, or do you mean signs or signals in someone's lives that something is not quite right, like with the relationship to like food, body image?
I think I started asking that question around what are some things that usually trigger somebody into this, but I think a better question is really what are some signs to notice that it may be time to get support or that it may be time to, address the fact that this isn't the average relationship to food and eating.
That first question is a really complex one, and there's a lot of great info out there about it. So I think it's good that we're shifting a little bit into the what are the warning signs that somebody needs help. There's several different eating disorders, and there's disordered eating outside of those, but each one, rather someone's like restricting or binging or purging or something else that is harmful to their self with food or they're over exercising, the core of it is similar in terms of how it shows up in their life. So it's similar in some ways for someone who's just kind of walking into this topic. If you notice somebody with depression or another form of addiction, there's these general signs that someone is unwell or that they need extra support that are also present with the eating disorder. So changes in mood, changes in sleep, changes in social, like withdrawing, isolation. With eating disorders, there can be physical symptoms too that vary disorder to disorder and may show up in some people, but not others. Even if they have the same behaviors, the symptoms can look different. I think that a great place for people to start, it might be good to link this in the show notes because there's so many different things that can present in someone when they're struggling. And depending on what stage or not stage, but like what's the word I'm looking for? Depending on what types of behavior someone's struggling with or how long they've been struggling, it can influence the symptoms. And a lot of things that I can say from like a non-clinical perspective are things that get praised times, unfortunately. So if somebody is losing lots of weight and people just assume because of diet culture, because of fat phobia, because of maybe our own body image issues, we see somebody losing weight and we assume it's a good thing. We assume or we equate thinness or less weight with health, which is totally false and like totally not okay. But it happens a lot. And a lot of times that comes out as praise. It usually doesn't get addressed as, hey, I noticed you've had a lot of changes, maybe in the way that you're eating or in your size. Are you okay? We assume or we equate thinness or less weight with health, which is totally false and like totally not okay. But it happens a lot. And a lot of times that comes out as praise. It usually doesn't get addressed as, hey, I noticed you've had a lot of changes, maybe in the way that you're eating or in your size. Are you okay? If it's someone that you love and feel like it's okay to say that with, a lot of times what happens is people get praised for weight loss. And instead of checking, are you okay? You don't know if it's cancer or an eating disorder or stress. We don't know why someone's losing weight. So checking our assumptions can be a really good thing in general. Or same thing when we see bodily changes with somebody, maybe gaining weight. That can also be a great thing. That can also be, it doesn't have to have like a meaning to it. So a lot of times we assign a meaning to someone gained weight, it means this, someone lost weight, it means that. And those things often are not true. So it's really important to look at health rather than size with people because size is not an indicator of health. I'm sure a doctor may have there's clinical things, but I'm not speaking from my clinical perspective. Also, in terms of dieting and behaviors with food, a lot of times similar thing. People may have restrictive tendencies or avoidant tendencies, or orthorexia may not officially be listed as an eating disorder, but orthorexic type tendencies. And that can show up as chronic dieting, excessive dieting, cutting out lots of food groups. And a lot of times there's praise for that too. But again, that's not an indicator of health. That's not a measure of health or even like success, but we assign those values to it. That's not a measure of health or even like success, but we assign those values to it. And instead of being asked, are you okay? Are you struggling? Like, do you feel safe? What's going on here? People are getting praised
Yeah.
sometimes, in some cases, for those symptoms. So looking for changes in behavior, in mood, in the way they relate to other people, in food, those are some basic ones. I think that this is really important. And there's a lot of clinical things that go beyond my realm of expertise. And for our listeners, I think it'd be great if we link something in the show notes about the more in-depth.
Definitely. We'll put some resources in the show notes of this episode so that people have more data to go and interact with. But I'm grateful for the topic the focus of that you brought up, because it is such a trap. If you're a heroin addict, you can go get clean from heroin and not touch it again. But it's like when you have a relationship with food that is maybe off kilter, you can't get away from that. You have to eat food for the rest of your life. So already it's this sort of very challenging thing to unwind and unkink. And add to that the social pressure, the social confirmation that if you get smaller, you get rewarded by praise. And if you get bigger, then the assumption is that something's going wrong. Like the whole mechanism of that is just so designed to not support people to heal this relationship. And I love that we live in a time right now where diet culture is being sort of upended and bashed over the head. But it doesn't change the fact that we have a lot of that societal programming just built into us. And even like our parents or the generations above us don't have that same new awareness or consciousness around this isn't a way to behave or treat your loved ones by praising them for being smaller or by only worrying about them if they gain weight. Like the whole system of that is a little bit twisted. And so I'm really grateful that there are people out there like you and that there are so many structures in place to support people to change their conversation around this. I just want us to acknowledge it's a hard thing to change because we live in a world that isn't supportive to that new way of thinking for the most part. So if someone out there is listening to this and you are struggling, of course, it makes perfect sense. And it doesn't have to be the way it is forever, which is why having people like Maneva on your side can be so transformational. So what are some of the first things that people could look at or address or start thinking about or consider to sort of move them in the direction of change or choosing to get support?
For people who are actively struggling or for people who want to have more of like a allyship or support in general?
People who are actively struggling.
The main place that a lot of people I know and myself have started is with therapy. The thing with eating disorder treatment, whether it's outpatient or inpatient or whatnot, is that insurance can help if you have access to it. But if you have access to it, there usually has to be, as with any other type of diagnosis or like dis-ease, air quotes, there has to be a diagnosis to have coverage. And therapy, aside from being foundational to a lot of mental health challenges as far as support, therapy gives a diagnosis, even if it's more of a label, even if it is a little bit like not exactly what you're experiencing, it unlocks more support. Because even if you don't have insurance, for example, there's organizations like Project Heal, where as long as you can kind of get something on paper to say, look, I'm experiencing this, then that unlocks the door. And it's not like a sentence. You can choose, right? You can choose. Maybe it feels better for you to start with a dietitian than a therapist, right? But getting started with a professional, usually a therapist or a dietitian. In my experience, I started with therapy. And those professionals, a lot of us, we know each other, coaches, dietitians, therapists, and there can be a system of referrals for anybody. This is a tricky thing. When you're starting with getting support, it is really hard because in some ways, at least for outpatient, a lot of clients feel they are their own case managers. And in some ways we are. Coaching helps take some of the burden off of that. Coaches are sort of the glue in between like different team members to collaborate with you and help you set goals. But starting with a therapist so you have someone and getting something on paper so that you can then receive support from an insurance or a nonprofit, and working with a therapist will help get you connected to other people that you may need, like a dietitian or a peer support group or a peer mentor or a coach, doctor, psychiatrist, herbalist, whoever your people are. Start with one and grow it from there. And it's difficult in some cases to do all the coordinating of that, but it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it.
Which is another great reason to have a coach who's on your side helping you coordinate all of those resources and figure out what the next step can be. Can you speak a little bit more to what it's like or what the sort of coaching relationship looks like when somebody decides to get a coach for their eating disorder?
Yeah. So that's a good question too. So a coach is an adjunct to a therapist and a dietitian. They're an additional layer of support. A therapist will usually work with people in terms of why. What led to the eating disorder? What is your personal story? What traumas have you experienced? What events have you survived? What is your family dynamic? What is your housing situation, right? Like, what are all of those more psychological, like, what led up to this kind of thing? A coach works in the realm of how. So a client might say to me, my therapist and I are working on trauma related things. My dietitian and I are working on a meal plan. My doctor is working on helping to stabilize my vitals. How do I go shopping for a prom dress or an event ceremony dress and not get triggered by the sizes? How do I eat my meal plan even when I don't know my hunger and fullness cues, or I don't know if I'm bloated or if I'm full or if I'm hungry? How do I do this? I had they have like a fight or an argument with someone in their household. I'm not there to say, here's what you need to eat, or here's how you need to resolve conflict in your family, or here's if they're trying to dress, you should wear something. I'm not there for like, how do you find the clothes you need to wear to leave your house without being so shut down by body image concerns and relationship to self and body that you just cancel the whole clothes shopping trip and don't leave your house because you don't have clothes, right? Like, how do you go into a store, pick clothes, go in the dressing room, try them on? How do you go grocery shopping without getting overwhelmed by what the labels say, rather it's fat free or this many calories or whatever the sticking points are for somebody, whatever their triggers are. I'm there for in the moment support and how. And in the moment support can look like texting in between sessions. I particularly like to use voice message texting because it gives somebody more than just words on the screen. And I offer meal support too. I know there's some therapists and some dietitians out there who are starting to offer meal support, which is lovely. But the thing with coaching is that it's meant to be adaptable, flexible, and in the moment, and be like the glue for the in between. Because even if somebody has a therapist, a dietitian, a doctor, a mentor, a support group, okay, maybe that's 5 to 10 hours per week that you're getting support, but the eating disorder struggle is happening 24/7. And so that's where a coach is there. People can call me when they're in the grocery store and they're like, I'm trying to buy rice and I don't think I can do it, or whatever the issue is.
Mhm.
Or they can text me and say, I'm at a wedding and I'm eating food in front of all these people. I'm not sure how to do it. They can text me and I can text them back. We've had coaches, we've had sober coaches for people with substance use disorder for a long time. And now we're having eating disorder coaches for folks with eating disorders or disordered eating just now getting here. So we're sort of like the glue in the in between. And I collaborate with people's team members. I check in with their therapists and I check in with their dietitians. And I say, hey, I'm the coach. Here's how I'm here to support the client. Here's how I'm here to support you and make your job even easier. How often do you want me to communicate you? What are the goals you're setting with this person? And then ask the client, what goals do you have for yourself, right? And so I'm reporting progress on this is what we worked on this week or this month, however often their team needs me to report back or check in.
Awesome. I want to bring in one more element, which is that you also support sort of an underrepresented part of the community as far as eating disorders go, which is vegan people. Can you speak to that a little bit? How that's sort of another trap
Yeah.
in the support system?
It can be such a trap. Yeah, no matter what angle it is. So I do not endorse any one way of eating for other people other than myself. I know what works for me. I know what aligns for me. And it is a tricky thing with people that animal rights activists or someone they say, I have eating disorder and I want to eat vegan so that I'm saving the animals or so that I'm saving the planet. And a lot of times that is in some ways at odds with their recovery, depending on what goals they have with their dietitian for a nutrient or weight restoration. That can be a challenge. And what I would say to somebody is there's no animal rights activist if there is no you. There's a lot of things you can do to help animals. There's a lot of things you can do to help the planet that have nothing to do with what you eat or what you don't eat. And at the same time, if somebody has a limitation, maybe they have celiacs, maybe they have type 1 or 2 diabetes, maybe they're lactose intolerant. Those things, while the eating disorder mindset can sort of take over that and say, I have a reason not to eat all these foods, right? Those challenges, considerations, right? Those considerations can be challenging, but they're not a reason that somebody can't recover. They're not a reason that somebody can't heal completely. And some things, if it's an absolute necessity, right? I know someone who has horrible allergic reactions to anything that comes from an animal. That's a major health consideration. That has to be taken into effect. When it comes more into preferences and ethical concerns, like in terms of people who want to eat vegan for ethical reasons, planets or animals or whatnot, I say save yourself first. As the saying goes, put on your own oxygen mask before you try to secure the oxygen mask of somebody else. Eat whatever you need to eat to be reaching those goals that you have in your team or with your dietitian or whatnot. I think it's one way that we can help animals, we can help the planet if that's something that we feel called to do, but it's a balance of like I don't endorse it. I don't say, everyone can be vegan, everyone should be vegan. I have never that's never resonated with me. That's never been my stance on it and it never will be because it doesn't feel authentic to me to say that or to believe that. I know there are people who struggle with veganism and eating disorders at the same time, trying to bridge the gap. And if it's something that somebody won't give up, if somebody says, I'm going to be vegan or vegetarian no matter what, and no one's going to talk me out of that, if we don't have any flexibility there, then it's like, okay, how can you recover completely from your eating disorder despite that? You might not eat animal protein, but we're still going to find a way to get you to get protein and minerals and fats and carbs and sugar and all the things that likely give you discomfort or fear because of an eating disorder. So there's a lot to that. I think that could be like a whole podcast episode. We might have to do another
Yeah.
podcast just for that one. But there's a way. If there's a will, there's a way. And in my experience, I wanted to rely less on animal products, rather it was hair care or skincare or food, because I don't agree with how that industry is functioning or not functioning. And there was a time in my recovery where I had cognitive dissonance about eating like meat and eggs and I just accepted it. I said, this is with the knowledge I have and the parts of my brain that are physically available for me to function with right now, because I had gaps in my memory, right? I had brain fog with what I know and what my goals are. The kindest thing I can do for myself is to eat the foods that are available without considering, is this vegan? Is this vegetarian? And just eat in a way that supports me. And the goal is to live, right? Like that was like the first and foremost goal. And then at a certain point in life, I was able to revisit that and rework that and say, you know what does this look like now? What does supporting animal rights look like now? What does supporting the environment look like now? And it's always an assessment. Like I say that I never say I am vegan. That's kind of like saying I am this or I am that. I am an alcoholic. I am anorexic. It's kind of the same thing where it's like, no, like we can heal from that. It's not an identity. And veganism, rather someone's vegetarian or vegan, I might say, hey, I mostly eat foods that are vegetarian. I might say something like that. I would never say to somebody, I am vegan, right? Unless it's just like,
There's an identity collapse that can be sort of a trap there.
yeah, especially with like the clean eating movement. I think that a lot of diet culture, a lot of fat phobia, a lot of fat shaming, a lot of health related rhetoric has sort of infiltrated what veganism really is. And I think that it's really unfortunate for people with eating disorders who are struggling with the relationship to food. And then there's this bombardment of all this meaning that's attached to like eating meat or not eating meat or whatever the issue is. And it's unfortunate and it's unfair. And it's something that I also want to see a lot of change with. And I'm starting to see some, like you said, we're kind of like diet culture is kind of being upended and smacked over the head. And I'm finally starting to see some more of that as it relates to the converse of vegetarianism and veganism.
I guess one thing we want to just say is you get to have whatever values you want and also heal from whatever eating pattern is not healthy or supportive for you. And that sometimes there may be a brief pause in absolute veganism if your body requires
Mhm.
something, and that doesn't mean you have to put those values aside or question who you are as a person because
Mhm.
you needed protein in that moment. That
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
needed
but
time to go soak cashews or I don't know, like, we
yes.
just need to, like, eat a sandwich right now, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And the last note I'll share on that, which is the overarching theme, is that there are people who say or who choose to eat a certain way for health reasons, rather it's vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, whatever it is. And I believe when you struggle with the eating disorder, the biggest concern to your health is the eating disorder. So, whatever may happen from eating foods that are deemed not clean or whatever, nothing that you could ever eat in a meal, I don't think could ever harm your health as much as the experience of having an eating disorder. That is the main concern to your health. So, could someone choose to eat a certain way for health? Sure. But when someone has an eating disorder, the main health concern as it relates to dietary things, of course, you have to consider if there's diabetes or celiacs or something, but nobody is going to do themselves a favor by causing unnecessary stress about food when they're in a food and eating recovery process.
Powerful. Awesome. We're kind of out of time, but the best places to get a hold of Maneva if you are out there and you are considering taking the leap into getting support for eating disorders, your website is manevagill.com. Gill is
Hmm.
Gill, and we will put that in the show notes. And definitely check Maneva out on social media. You can search Maneva Gill. And we'll also put her email address in the caption in case you don't want to go through all the online portals. You want to just get in touch and have a conversation. That will be in there. But before we complete, I just want to ask, are there any last words of wisdom that you want to leave people with?
Choosing one is hard. Choosing one is difficult. One thing that I will turn into my last words of wisdom. It could have been its own topic entirely, but I will condense it here. There is a principle that I work with all my clients, rather it's coaching, mentoring, whatever. That is the idea that your healthy self, the core self of who you are, will heal your eating disorder self. the part of you that relies on the behaviors with food and exercise to meet some kind of need. The way I work with people is not about eradicating the eating disorder and like kicking it to the curb. It's about reintegrating a part of yourself that's been fragmented from the whole of who you are. So, my last little word of wisdom here, I'm saying that because I have known so many people, and I have believed this too at some point, that it's too hard or it's not possible or people can do it, but I can't do it. Or I have struggled for too long, or I have too many comorbidity, co-occurring diagnosis or whatnot. There's a belief that we can't, or we're not worthy, or it's too hard, it's impossible. But no matter how long someone has struggled, no matter how much someone is struggling, there is a healthy self and there is eating disorder self. And it's bringing the eating disorder self back to center to reintegrate with the healthy self. That process is possible for anyone. It doesn't mean that everybody will or they all will right now. It means that it's just something to keep in mind. If you're listening to this episode and you're like, okay, like this is helpful. Yes, you can really is the point of it. There's a core you that's always there, even if it hasn't been in the driver's seat childhood or since a time that you can even remember, it is there and it can be accessed and you can use that for tremendous healing.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you for being on the show, Maneva.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone out there for listening. If this resonated, we're glad that you found it. We're always really appreciative of you podcast listeners out there. If you have a friend who maybe is struggling, maybe ask permission if you can send them this episode and then send them this episode. It might be helpful. Be kind, be generous. And whatever happens, keep asking big questions and taking bold action because you are here for a reason. We'll see you on the next episode.